This is the story of Herb Adams, a man who looked at one of the most legendary engines ever built and said, "I can make it better." The 426 Hemi was already a monster. Chrysler had designed it to dominate, and dominate it did. But Herb Adams wasn't satisfied with domination. He wanted perfection. And what he discovered would change everything people thought they knew about the limits of American muscle. Along the way, we will encounter racing legends, engineering breakthroughs, skeptics who thought they knew better, and secrets that the factory never wanted you to find. So let us begin. But first, what exactly was the 426 Hemi, and why was it considered untouchable? If you don't know what a Hemi engine is, let me explain. The name comes from the hemispherical combustion chamber design. Picture the top of a sphere cut in half. That's the shape of the chamber where fuel and air mix before ignition. This design wasn't new when Chrysler introduced it. In fact, the concept had been around since the early days of internal combustion. But what Chrysler did with it in the 1960s was nothing short of revolutionary. The original 426 Hemi debuted in 1964, and it was built for one purpose: winning races. Chrysler engineers had been watching Ford and General Motors battle it out on the NASCAR circuit, and they wanted in. Not just in, actually, they wanted to win, so they created something special. I mention this because understanding the Hemi's origins is crucial to understanding what Herb Adams accomplished. This wasn't some economy engine that needed help. This was already the most feared power plant in American racing. Factory specifications claimed somewhere around 425 horsepower, though everyone in the industry knew that number was conservative. The real output was likely closer to 500 horsepower in race trim. Chrysler underrated their engines for insurance purposes and to maintain some competitive mystery. The Hemi's design was elegant in its aggression. Those hemispherical chambers allowed for larger valves positioned at optimal angles. Air could flow in and exhaust could flow out with minimal restriction. The spark plug sat right in the center of the chamber, ensuring even flame propagation. Everything about the design maximized power. But here's the thing about maximizing power. There's always more to find. Always. By the late 1960s, the 426 Hemi had become legend. It dominated drag strips. It terrorized oval tracks. Richard Petty won championships with it. Don Garlett set records with it. The engine had earned a reputation as the ultimate American V8. And that reputation made most people afraid to touch it. Most people, not Herb Adams. Now, Herb Adams was not your typical engine builder. He came from a background of precision and experimentation. While other builders were content to bolt on factory parts and call it a day, Adams wanted to understand why things worked. He would spend hours with flow benches and dynamometers testing theories that other people dismissed as impossible. His workshop was legendary among those who knew about it. Tools organized with almost obsessive precision. Notebooks filled with data that would make an engineer weep with joy. And engines. So many engines, all in various states of assembly, each one teaching him something new. The first time Adams got his hands on a 426 Hemi, he didn't immediately start modifying it. He studied it. He measured every port, every chamber, every passage. He ran flow tests at different pressure levels. He compared factory tolerances to actual dimensions, and what he found surprised him. The Hemi was good, very good, but it wasn't perfect. This would prove to be the beginning of something remarkable. You see, factory engines, even legendary ones, are built to certain compromises. They need to survive warranty periods. They need to meet emission standards. They need to be assembled by workers who might be having a bad day. These compromises don't mean the engines are bad. They just mean there's room for improvement if you know where to look. Adams knew where to look. His first discovery came in the cylinder heads. The hemispherical chambers were beautifully designed, but the ports feeding them were another story. Factory casting processes left rough surfaces that disrupted airflow. tiny imperfections that you couldn't see with the naked eye but showed up clearly on a flow bench. Most builders would grab a die grinder and start polishing. Adams took a different approach. He mapped the entire port, identifying exactly where restrictions occurred. Then, instead of just smoothing everything out, he reshaped the port strategically. Some areas needed material removed. Others, counterintuitively, needed material added. The goal wasn't pretty ports. The goal was ports that moved air efficiently. The results were immediate and substantial. But here's where it gets fascinating. Adams didn't stop at the ports. He examined the valve angles, the chamber shapes, the way the combustion event actually occurred. He found that small changes to the squish area could improve combustion efficiency without sacrificing the Hemi's characteristic power curve. If you're enjoying this story, consider subscribing. It really helps us reach more people who love this kind of deep dive into automotive history. But anyway, back to Adams and his discoveries. The squish modifications alone added measurable power. We're talking gains that factory engineers would have killed for, and Adams was just getting started. His next target was the valvetrain. The 426 Hemi used a complex system with 2 rocker shafts per head and massive valves that seemed impossibly large for the era. Conventional wisdom said this system was already optimized. The factory had some of the best engineers in Detroit working on it. What could one man in a private shop possibly improve? Plenty, as it turned out. Adams noticed that the valve springs, while adequate for factory specifications, became the limiting factor at higher RPMs. They controlled the valves well enough under normal conditions, but pushed the engine harder, and problems emerged. Valve float became an issue before the engine could reach its true potential. His solution involved custom spring packages with precisely calculated rates and installed heights. Not just stronger springs, because stronger isn't always better. Springs with the right characteristics for how the engine actually operated under load. The camshaft came next. Factory grinds were conservative, designed to provide good idle quality and acceptable emissions. Adams understood that a camshaft is essentially the brain of an engine, controlling when and how long the valves open. Change the cam, and you change the engine's entire personality. He experimented with dozens of different profiles. Longer duration for more top-end power, increased lift for better breathing, overlap adjustments for improved scavenging. Each change taught him something new about what the Hemi could become. Make no mistake, this wasn't random experimentation. Adams approached each modification scientifically. He would change one variable, test the results, document everything, then move to the next variable. This methodical approach separated him from countless other builders who threw parts at engines, hoping something would stick. The cumulative effect of his modifications was staggering. An engine that Chrysler claimed made 425 horsepower, an engine that probably really made close to 500 in race form, was now producing numbers that seemed impossible. We're talking about gains measured in dozens of horsepower, achieved through smart engineering rather than exotic components. Now this is where the story gets really interesting, because Adams didn't keep his discoveries secret. He shared them, not with everyone, of course, but with serious racers and fellow builders who understood the value of what he had found. Word spread through the racing community like wildfire. Drag racers started showing up at his shop, Hemi engines in tow, hoping Adams could work his magic. Stock car teams made inquiries. Even some factory engineers, curious about what this independent builder had discovered, came to see for themselves. The reaction from Chrysler's engineering department was, as you can imagine, complicated. On one hand, they were proud that their engine was capable of such performance. The Hemi had been designed with headroom built in, room to grow as racing demands increased. Adams was proving that headroom existed. On the other hand, some engineers were embarrassed. How had they missed these opportunities? The port work that Adams performed could have been implemented at the factory. The valvetrain improvements weren't exotic. They were logical extensions of existing technology. There is a story, and I can't confirm whether it's true, that a delegation of Chrysler engineers visited Adams's shop in the late 1960s. They supposedly spent an entire day examining his modifications, taking notes, asking questions. When they left, according to legend, they drove straight back to Detroit and implemented several of his discoveries into their racing program. Whether that story is true or not, the influence Adams had on Hemi development is undeniable. Techniques he pioneered became standard practice among serious engine builders. His port designs were studied and copied. His understanding of the valve train informed generations of subsequent development. But here's the thing about Herb Adams that really stands out. He never stopped learning, never stopped questioning, never assumed he had found the final answer. Every engine that came through his shop taught him something new. Every dyno pull provided data to analyze. He approached engine building as an ongoing experiment rather than a finished product. I mention this because it explains why his modifications worked so well. He wasn't trying to create one ultimate engine. He was trying to understand the principles that made engines perform. Each Hemi he built was better than the last because he applied lessons from all the previous ones. The racing results spoke for themselves. Cars running Adams-modified Hemis started winning races they had no business winning. Elapsed times dropped. Trap speeds increased. Competitors who had been dominant suddenly found themselves struggling to keep up. One particular drag racing team, and I wish I could name them, but the records are frustratingly incomplete, went from mid-pack finishers to championship contenders after Adams rebuilt their Hemi. Same car, same driver, same basic engine. Just Adams modifications transforming performance. We can only imagine what the competition thought when they popped the hood and saw what looked like a standard 426 Hemi. No exotic parts, no obvious giveaways, just an engine that made substantially more power than anything else in its class. This is the great irony of Adams' work. His modifications weren't flashy. They didn't require unobtainium parts or massive budgets. They required understanding of airflow, understanding of combustion, understanding of mechanical limits and how to push them safely. The smartest engineering often looks simple when you see the result. It's only when you understand the process that you appreciate the genius. As the 1970s arrived, the muscle car era began to fade. Emissions regulations tightened. Insurance rates skyrocketed. The wild performance wars of the 1960s gave way to more practical concerns. Chrysler eventually discontinued the 426 Hemi for street applications, though racing versions continued for years afterward. But Herb Adams's discoveries didn't become obsolete. The principles he identified transcended any single engine design. Airflow is airflow. Combustion is combustion. The lessons learned from the Hemi applied to whatever came next. Builders who had studied under Adams, or who had studied his techniques, went on to successful careers working on everything from small block Chevrolets to imported four-cylinders. The fundamentals transfer. This would prove to be Adams's greatest legacy, not any single engine, however powerful, but a methodology, an approach to engine building that prioritized understanding over tradition. Think about that for a moment. The 426 Hemi was designed by some of the most talented engineers in American automotive history. They had resources that Adams couldn't dream of, testing facilities, supercomputers, at least by 1960s standards, armies of technicians. Yet one man, working in a private shop with hand tools and curiosity, found performance they had missed. It's a reminder that expertise isn't just about resources. It's about how you approach problems. Now, there are skeptics who questioned Adams's claims over the years. Some people argued that his dyno numbers were inflated, that his modifications couldn't possibly deliver the gains he reported. This is natural. Revolutionary claims invite scrutiny. But the skeptics faced a problem. The racing results were public record. Cars running Adams-built engines performed better than identical cars without his modifications. You can argue about dyno accuracy, but you can't argue with elapsed times and trap speeds. Here's what the skeptics missed. Adams wasn't claiming to have invented some magical new technology. He was claiming to have optimized existing technology more effectively than the factory. That's a much more defensible position. Every engineer knows that production tolerances leave room for improvement. Adams simply proved how much room actually existed. The contrast between factory methods and Adams' methods illustrates a fundamental truth about engineering. Factories optimize for consistency and cost. They need to build thousands of engines that all work reliably. Small improvements that require hand-fitting or individual attention don't scale. Adams optimized for performance. He didn't need to build thousands of engines. He needed to build the best possible version of each engine that came through his door. Different goals require different approaches. Neither approach is wrong, they're just different. But for racers who needed every possible advantage, Adams' approach delivered results that factory methods couldn't match. As we approach the end of this story, I want to address something that I find fascinating about Herb Adams and builders like him. They represent a particular American tradition, the tinkerer, the inventor, the person who looks at accepted wisdom and asks, "But what if we tried it this way?" This tradition gave us everything from the telephone to the airplane to the personal computer. People working in garages and small workshops, questioning assumptions, testing alternatives, finding better ways. Herb Adams wasn't trying to embarrass Chrysler engineers. He wasn't trying to prove that he was smarter than they were. He was trying to extract maximum performance from a design he loved. The Hemi fascinated him. Its potential fascinated him, and he devoted himself to unlocking that potential. That passion is evident in every modification he developed. You don't spend hundreds of hours mapping port flow unless you genuinely care about the work. You don't fill notebooks with dyno data unless you are committed to understanding what makes engines tick. And what of Herb Adams himself? His later years saw him continuing to work on engines, sharing knowledge with a new generation of builders who had grown up hearing stories about his Hemi work. He became something of an elder statesman in the engine-building community, respected for both his accomplishments and his willingness to teach others. The 426 Hemi itself has achieved immortal status in automotive history. Values for original examples have skyrocketed. Collectors pay premium prices for engines that bear the famous orange paint. And among serious enthusiasts, Adams' modifications remain the gold standard for anyone seeking to build a truly exceptional Hemi. The engines he built, the few that still survive in original Adams modified form, are treasured. Owners understand that they possess something special, not just a powerful engine, but a piece of engineering history. I mention this because it speaks to the lasting impact of Adams' work. 50 years later, his modifications are still studied. His techniques are still applied. His understanding of the Hemi continues to inform builders who never met him, but who benefit from his discoveries. There is something beautiful about that. Knowledge passing from generation to generation, each builder adding their own insights while honoring what came before. The 426 Hemi was designed to be legendary. Chrysler's engineers succeeded beyond their wildest dreams, but Herb Adams showed that even legends can be improved. Even the best designs have room to grow. Even accepted wisdom can be questioned. That might be the most important lesson of all. Not the specific modifications Adams developed, though those remain valuable, but the mindset that led to their discovery, the willingness to look at something everyone considered perfect and ask what could make it better. Because there's always something that can make it better. Always another tenth of a second, always another few horsepower, always another level of performance waiting to be unlocked. You just have to be willing to look for it. Well, there we are. the story of a man who refused to accept limits, even limits set by the most legendary engine in American muscle car history. Herb Adams proved that smart engineering can accomplish what brute force cannot. He proved that one dedicated builder can find what entire engineering departments miss. And he proved that the 426 Hemi, as magnificent as it was from the factory, was capable of even more. So there we have it. If you enjoyed this one, subscribe for more, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what engine you'd like me to cover next. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.